The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
Welcome you all to a series of conversations that we're having about the TLU Reader. And of course, this fall is our semester to launch it, and we're really excited about that. So I'm very excited to be here with you today to talk about your chapters and your contribution to the TLU Reader. My name's Beth Berry, and I teach in our composition department. And it was my pleasure to edit your chapters and to provide the introduction. I didn't have to work too hard. They were already super great. And so if you could introduce yourselves and let us know about what you did.
Okay, I'm Juan Rodriguez. I teach in the English department and have been doing so for 29 years. And I had a thoroughly enjoyable time contributing to this anthology.
My name is Christy Quiroz, and I am the Vice President and Dean of Student Life and Learning. I've been at Texas Lutheran for 17 years now, but was also a graduate. I graduated my undergraduate degree from Texas Lutheran, and was very happy to contribute a chapter to the book. I'm very excited about it.
Okay. And when you heard from Dr. Rugi Jones, what were your initial thoughts about your chapter?
I was very excited for the opportunity, and my chapter is on the Comprehensive Education Plan, which talks about a tool that we developed here at Texas Lutheran to help students put the different pieces of the puzzle that they go through while they're getting an education into one larger picture, and help them see how that one larger picture is built from the different experiences they go through. So I was excited that I'd have an opportunity to present that to all freshmen across the board through the book.
Well, when Phil called, it fell his request to write this a piece, which was mostly autobiographical, fit into, I've been working on a memoir for several years, and though there were specific requests that Phil had in order for it to fit into the reader, I had most of it thought out and had it written, not the same way, in the same way that it appears in the anthology. So I was excited that maybe, if not the whole memoir, at some point, a shorter version and a little point of moment in my life could be shared with others. So I was excited about that.
And of course, we all knew going in that this was going to be for our first year students. How did that affect the choices that you made as you were putting together this chapter?
Well, the first thing was to, and Phil and I talked about this, was how do we make the demands of the course, or make my essay fit the demands of the course. And I had always I thought that a critical text in my own education had been the allegory of the cave, even before coming to TLU as an undergraduate, because I had I loved the sense of discovery and how education is, in fact, a journey of discovery, and the peeling away of realities that also excited me, and so. I found it rather easy to adjust what I had written for another audience to this audience, because I think our students, or students in general, experience that process of discovery in their education. And so I thought it went well one with the other.
And how are you keeping our students in mind during that writing of your chapter?
Well, the Comprehensive Education Plan is developed for undergraduates, first year, second year kind of students. And so it was easy to put in the book for a freshman ear to hear and eye to read, because it's there to help the student at the beginning of their experience understand how what they're going through and the choices that they're making will result in an education overall, not just a degree in the major of which they choose, but an education and what that means in the larger sense.
And so if you had to have a rough count of how many versions or iterations of your chapter there were before you got to that final product, can you come up with a guess about the number of drafts?
Well, I would guess about 7 or 8.
Yeah, for the original memoir, since it's in rough draft form, there's just that one version because I haven't gone back to reread it since I'm interested in finishing first. But for this one, there were about 7 versions of it before. The hardest part was compressing the experience. That was the hardest part, and how to make a point in my contribution is titled "In and Out of Plato's Cave: A Personal Tale," and how to compress that personal tale to fit the demands of the anthology. That was really difficult, so there were a lot of paragraphs and pages that had to be thrown out or rearranged in some way. So there were several versions, but that's part of the process.
And one of the challenges in writing my chapter was I had a co-author, Dr. Maria Avalos, and so we would both write on it, and we have very different writing styles, and so trying to mesh that together and make it sound of one voice and on the same page, so to speak, through the chapter. So that was, it's the first time I've done that with a co-author, and it was very interesting and challenging and a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, too, though.
I know that when I read your chapters, I felt like I was getting to know a part of you that I didn't know before. So I very much enjoyed that, and I think our students will too. And of course, when it came time, I didn't realize it, but Dr. Ruby Jones came to me and said, would you write the introduction? And without really thinking, I said, sure. And then I got to sit with that because I had been sort of in the catbird seat, being able to tell everybody, well, I think you need to do this or that. Well, it's very much another thing to put yourself in the vulnerable place of putting something on the page. So that was nerve-wracking. And then it got to a point where I just had to commit and sit down and get the thing done. And it was a relief to go through that process and finish and have the students in mind and try to imagine how they were going to take it all in was exciting. And to know that we were going to put it to use right away. So I'm eager to see how they receive it.
I think the difficult part for me was the fact that I had done very little writing to match particular requests or demands from an editor. Usually the editors correct what you write in terms of grammar or syntax, the formal aspects of it, but rarely do they say, I want you to write a poem, let's say, or a short story about this particular thing. And so making the adjustments, not only to comply with the request of a general audience, these are our TLU students, but knowing that you are going to read it and that Phil Ruby Jones is going to read it, and that was probably the most difficult part. That in a way I had you two in the back of my head, looking over my shoulder and going, and that was kind of scary. So.
You know, my chapter is different than the rest of the book because it's about a tool and advising and a process. It's not a personal story. So that too made it a different writing process than some of the other chapters.
And I think what's neat about that, though, is there's a range of approaches, a range of voices in the text, and they all contribute, to the whole. One thing I've been thinking about is, of course, we know they're going to read it in their first year of college. I'm wondering if you were to describe your first year of college, what 3 words would you use to describe that transition from high school into college life?
Fear, fear, fear. Those are the 3 words. I came from a very rural, small high school. And I went to a large public university, and I went from where everyone in high school knew me and I knew them, to I know no one. And these were difficult times because of Jim Crow and the way brown people were looked at the time. And there were particular habits at the university where freshman students had to wear a beanie, you may recall, or maybe you're too young for that, wear a beanie, and any upperclassmen could ask you to do tasks for them, like carry their books and be outright. You were considered a plebe. And so in addition to kind of the segregation and racism, there was this other thing that was a burden for me. And then having to meet the requirements, the kind of social segregation at the university, like sitting in the back of the room and not being able to participate in class because you just sat down and shut up. So I was afraid of that, going from one environment where I had learned that environment and I knew how to cope with it and was quite an expert at that, to a totally new environment where I had no time to really learn because now I was working so much. And so I would just go to class and come back to work. But then also the fear, because the level of work, the expectations of me were much higher. I had become very comfortable in high school. And so it was relatively easy to make an A in high school. But very soon I learned that it wasn't relatively easy to make an A at the university and wanting the A. So that was also, I was afraid. It took me 3 or 4 years to get over that, but fear.
Dr. Quiroz?
I would say one would be relief. They took me.
I made it.
I got accepted. And I was happy to be done with high school. I was ready to leave high school. So I would say one was relief. 2 would be self-doubt. A lot of questioning. Came from a huge high school. My graduating class was 1,000. And when I came to TLC in that day, it was maybe 800 at the most. And so it was so small. And I thought, what am I doing at this small place? And everybody knows everybody. And to me, that was kind of intimidating because I was very much used to flying under the radar. And you don't fly under the radar in that small of a setting. And then also just not knowing what I wanted to do. You know, what do I major in? And what are the choices I'm going to be faced with? And what am I going to screw this up in the next year? Is it going to be downhill from here? Is this the apex? So a lot of like doubt and questions in that sense. And then the third, I would say expanding. Because through those questions and being exposed to so many different people and different thoughts and different belief systems, that even though I was in a small place, it was really so much larger than my high school ever was, that it expanded my boundaries tremendously, so that it really became this strange both sides of the coin thing, but a wonderful first year. Now, as I was going through it, I don't know if I would have described it that glowingly, because it's a struggle, but the struggle was so worth it. And then, of course, you have all the fun stuff, too, that works its way in. It was a good first year, but definitely relief, self-doubt, and expanding. I think those are 3 good words to help describe it.
I'd like to add that since I was the first one in my family to attend the university, I was lost much of the time in how to manipulate, how to get to know the system, because I really had no one to ask. And sometimes just simple conceptual terms I didn't understand at first. And that was also difficult. But slowly and surely, the environment builds on you as you contribute to the environment as well. So
I think I must have had that in mind, or I was trying to get to that idea of an alien landscape in the introduction when I talked about that in terms of what reading at the college level is like, because it is entering into a foreign world, and you have to be aware that if you feel like you are entering someplace that you don't know, gee, is the ground going to give away here?
Right.
You know, that's just pretty much how it goes. There's the only way to get through it is to put one foot in front of the other and do it.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering about your chapters and how they are located in maybe an ongoing dialogue about your subject. You know, we know we're not the first people to write about these subjects. So how would you locate your chapter in a series of conversations or a dialogue about your subject? Dr. Quiroz?
Well, I think the ongoing conversation that has to do with the topic of comprehensive education plan and is the understanding that no matter what your major is, there are things that you take outside of your maybe choice of interest or strength, that you're taking courses and required and some not required, that help expand your knowledge and will help you do better at what your major is and make you a better educated person. And the institution has goals for all of its graduates, that by the time you graduate from Texas Lutheran University, you will have achieved X, Y, and Z, you know, a breadth of education and the ability to write well and speak well and think critically and know and make ethical decisions and those kind of things, and how all of the courses that you take add to reaching those goals. They give you practice, they give you foundations to build upon, and while they seem like they're very different, and a computer science major might be, why do I have to take this art class? I have no talent, no interest. Well, it's important. It's important, and it will help you reach those goals. And so the chapter is an ongoing conversation of how you progress in your tenure here at the institution, and in fact lifelong education, of how all of your experiences go toward you becoming a better person and better understanding of the world around you and where you fit in it. And that education is not just in a box. And sometimes that's what we look at as getting the degree, and this is the steps I need to take to get through the box to get the degree. But there are all kinds of divergent roads and paths, and it makes you a richer, more complicated, and in-depth person to get there. And that for sure is an ongoing conversation.
Can you think of a class that maybe you took that you weren't quite sure how it would contribute to who you are today, that maybe now you see more clearly how it has?
Yes, definitely. For one, I would say philosophy, because, and that seems like such a basic, but when I was a freshman taking it, and it turned out that philosophy wasn't just sitting there deciding what the philosophy
How
of the
many
day
angels
was.
can fit?
Exactly. But that, you know, there was ways of thinking and different philosophical approaches, and it was really very rigorous. And it was training how to think, and I had never been exposed to that before. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Everybody just thinks. You know, why do I have to be trained how to think? And poor Dr. Gilbertson at the time just, you know, I think he had a challenge in me. And it was at 8 in the morning, which was very challenging for me as well. So that was a tough one in that I didn't think I'd ever use it. But it seems so obvious now that that's like a basic building block that everybody would need. And then the other one was college algebra, because I was not good at it. I didn't understand it. I have no idea why you put letters and numbers together in the same thing. They're like two separate systems in my mind. And so that was a challenge, and I kept thinking, I'm never going to need to know algebraic equations for anything after I'm done with this course. But again, it was that training of thought. And how do you approach something, and how do you solve a problem, especially when you don't even understand the variables. But you can learn how to do it. So those to me, for my freshman year, were my two hardest classes that I just railed against all the time, but are just so important to everything that goes from it.
Great examples.
Well, the conversation, of course, is as old as human beings. What is learning? And from that, what is education? And that's kind of an ongoing, especially for universities and schools and those involved with the delivery of education. But I think that more specifically that conversation began at TLU some 20 or so years ago when the original FREX course began, and it was titled Introduction to the Arts and Sciences. And in developing that course, the faculty members involved and other administrators had to ask themselves, what do we want our students to learn? And why do we want them to learn that? And so that conversation began campus-wide. It was actually a conversation that had gone nationwide, especially after the student movement of the 1960s and 70s. And so we began to ask those questions, and the result of asking those questions was, again, we had an anthology, a reader, and various other articles and books and so on. And that idea has been refined through the years. After Introduction to the Arts and Sciences, we developed a course that was called General Education, GEC 134, the predecessor to this course. So that's the kind of and I think it's important for everyone, particularly students and faculty members, but institutions of learning, that they keep asking themselves, what is education and what is learning? Because to do otherwise is to fail at both, teaching and learning. And so I think it's very important to continue that conversation.
And I think in many ways this book invites students to participate in that conversation, to know that that conversation is going on, and to say, here's what you're getting into, number one, here's what you've signed up for, and then to ask, so now what do you think about this?
Yeah, I have to add that one of the most rewarding moments in my teaching career happened here at TLU, and this young man, student who I had in Introduction to the Arts and Sciences, some 7 years after he had been in my course, he wrote me a letter, and he said, dear professor, after graduation and working, I finally understand that course. So it was, sometimes it takes time for all of us to really comprehend the message that professors are sometimes communicating.
Right, and so in the meantime, while we all wait for that next epiphany, because of course we're not beyond that experience ourselves, I know I always look forward to the next epiphany. So
Well,
that's the exciting part.
Earlier on, you asked how this particular essay came about, and something very specific that I just thought of was that in a faculty meeting, we were going around talking about education and so forth, and I happened to mention that it wasn't until I was a professor and had been a professor for several years that I realized that I knew a lot of things because I had had a lot of education, but that I understood very little. And I mentioned that at that point, which happened in 1974, at that point I had to go back and reread most of what I had read before, because I had, up until that point, I could not distinguish or was not aware that text said something, but they mean something else most of the time. And I had never thought of a text as something that says, right, through the words or whatever, and that meaning then that the reader then contributes to the meaning by the amount of knowledge that they have, previous knowledge, and their own understanding of the words. It was there that my real education began, and Phil remembered that after that conversation, and he said, in the essay, I want you to talk about how you had to reread, and in fact I do mention toward the end how I had to reread a lot of the material that I had read before, because no one had pointed that out to me, that there was a difference between what a text says and what a text means.
So we look forward to bringing our students in on this conversation very soon.
Excellent.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.